Okay, here we go. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining this discussion, this expert panel discussion, where I will be hosting my guests, Bart Papagai, Kevin McCaffrey, and we'll be discussing the human factor in the launch of digital services in developing countries in this region. When I say developing countries, I mean Africa and the Middle East. Our guests are Bart Papagai. Bart is one of the pioneers in the domain of culture, leadership, and enterprise agility, enterprise architecture, change management, emotional intelligence. These were his domains for more than 30 years. I got to know Bart when I had a very specific request, which is finding a coach who has been there applying enterprise agility, living in what is now becoming a buzzword, a hot topic, which is how to achieve agility in telecommunication firms. So I learned that Bart was part of BSO. BSO Origin was a company back in the 80s that has adopted all of what management consulting firms are preaching nowadays. So he joined Gartner. He was a VP there in research, and he managed to write down his knowledge, his experience in this domain, and I'm sure he will enrich this discussion today. Welcome, Bart.
Thank you, Lakman. Very honored to be here.
Thank you. And we have Kevin McCaffrey. I got to know Kevin McCaffrey from Team Forum. Team Forum is an international nonprofit organization for the telco industry. There was a software called Curate FX for launching digital services based on a digital ecosystem, which is adopted as an industry practice in telecommunication worldwide. So Kevin is the CEO of Trident. Trident is a partner to Team Forum to enrich the planning, the architecture part in launching digital services successfully in the region. Bart has many engagements in the region, and he has experience to share with us today. So welcome, Kevin.
Thank you, Lakman. It's a pleasure and an honor to join everyone today. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I join you from Makman Technology Consulting. We are a management consulting firm in the region. We are a certified associate for the forum in Africa and Middle East. And we do provide our consulting services in cooperation with our partners for the success of these initiatives, not only on the technology layer. Our focus is mainly on the people side, on the human factor, on the system. So let's start with a quick introduction to the topic of today. So back in the 80s, there was a big discussion about process reengineering. Why? Because companies then discovered that it's not only the technology. Most projects that focused on the technology element failed, and people found a missing element. They said, we want to go back and fix things. So the focus was on process reengineering. And then after some time, people realized that process is not the only factor. So there is another factor, which is the people factor, the talent factor. So they were focused on training people, on upskilling people. The challenge was that was not enough. So the missing factor was culture. And we started to hear a lot about culture and the famous saying of Peter Drucker, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And what Drucker said, that bad systems fail good people. So how we can find the holistic system, which we call culture, that can make things succeed. So today in this discussion, we will cover these three factors. So as per the agenda that you have received, we will start by the people element, the change management element, the inspiration element for the people, the culture, and then we will go with our questions to the process element, which is the system, so that once we get the good people, we place them in the right system, and then we go into the technology. However, and then we take the questions. However, before I start with the people and the process, and we go for a local case study in the region, I would like to start the discussion by a prerequisite for people and process to succeed in terms of technology, which is the bottom line. which is the infrastructure. So Bard and Kevin, what is your take about the importance of a minimum viable infrastructure to get these digital services succeed?
Yeah, I can reiterate what we talked about in the past, and that is that for digital services to succeed, you have to have a certain minimum level of service. And one of the mistakes you could make is to rush ahead without the infrastructure being there. Now, it doesn't have to be fancy or state of the art. It has to be stable and predictable. I think one of the things that makes digital services difficult to use for people is the unpredictability of service. So I would say that one of the things you focus on as you prepare yourself to become a digital service provider is the stability, or rather the predictability of your infrastructure. That requires forces outside of your direct control. So that means you have to grow your influence. You have to find partnerships. You have to build consortia. That is something you do in parallel with your further development, but you shouldn't ignore it. That's one of the conclusions we came to, and I think that's an important point to make.
Absolutely. So when we say fancy, it's not the highest, like in, let's say, Japan or the industrial world.
No.
And I've seen many cases where in many countries there are glitches, there are challenges. It's not that specific.
And I can give a counterexample actually, where because there was no infrastructure, a different approach turned out to be really successful, which was in the regional areas in India, where you could do a lot with mobile phones that normally you would expect to be doing on the internet, right? And so with a bit of creativity, you can maybe find an existing infrastructure that you can repurpose for certain services. And so there may be some creativity involved, but I think aiming too high is a risk here, because you can't go for gold-plated infrastructure straight away, and it's not necessary. If you scope your services correctly, you can do with modest infrastructure as long as it's predictable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, I'd agree, Bard. I think the thing with it is that it needs to be fit for purpose. So, it depends on the environment and what works in one region or one country, or even one region within a country may not work elsewhere. The other thing I find is that, you need to consider an iterative process when you're looking at digital services. It's, not everyone is going to get it 100% right immediately. So better to get that MVP out, and as they say, they say fail fast, because if you want to get feedback, and sooner rather than later, and adjust, and we'll talk about it as we continue to this discussion. But the other thing that goes hand in hand with infrastructure is thinking of the end user, the end customer, the consumer of that digital service. How are they going to use it? What's the value to them? And again, you need to, you can have the best infrastructure in the world, but if you're not delivering value, it doesn't matter. It's more important to have the focus on the value and manage to the infrastructure.
I can actually give a great example that happened in the Northern Territory in Australia, where they started delivering digital services to Aboriginal communities. And the discovery they made was that a single iPad per village was actually sufficient to provide the services they were providing. And they gave them a satellite receiver. And that was all they needed to do about the infrastructure. But the most important thing was that it had to work when they needed it. That's why I hammered on the reliability, the predictability of it. But they first wanted to give everybody a phone or an iPhone or an iPad, but that wasn't practical. If you live in the middle of the jungle, these things keep breaking and you lose them and they get wet. And so a single iPad in a properly secured location with predictable connection, and then design the delivery of the services, as Kevin says, to the circumstances, right? Make sure that you have a product that they can use when they need it and is available as they need it. Now, so I never thought that they could reach digital services into really an outback community that quickly by simply realizing we don't need to do everything. We need to do just the things that are necessary. Everything else can come later.
Mhm. So this is a very interesting case.
Yeah.
They provided a single iPad.
Yeah, for a village.
People were using in turn. And what was that digital service?
It was a library and storytelling service. The idea with communities in the north of Australia is they share a lot of knowledge in the form of stories, right? And they keep in touch with each other through storytelling sessions. Now, when in the rainy season, it's impossible to travel, and they got really isolated. So the idea was we have a building, and they come together. And instead of only telling stories with the local community, they would connect the communities together, and they have larger storytelling sessions. And so a single point of contact was enough to have a whole group of people connect to another group of people somewhere else. The library's part of this was that they could have access to Google for the first time in their lives. And so they could catch up with other people in Australia. When they needed something, they could Google it, which was a big game changer for the kids there going to school.
So this is a very useful example. Internet penetration varies in the region. The example of Jio as a company in India, how they increased the penetration as a telco firm versus the traditional internet service provider, ISP. So that is the original pipe business model for telco firms. How can these telco firms evolve to become a digital service enabler to provide such services? On top of I always give an example that this connectivity is becoming like the highway that for cars. And if telcos stay only maintaining the highway and providing it wider and better and getting the tariff for people to use it, it's a disrupt. So they'll get disrupted. So they will need to transform, because this is becoming like air, in the fourth industrial revolution with 5G, etc. So how can telecommunication firms, with their legacy of size, of bureaucracy, they cannot beat the Airbnbs or the Amazons or the startups of this world that have succeeded, how they can become agile, given your experience, Bart, in such regard?
Okay, there's two things to consider. First of all, it's a mindset change, right? So they need to start thinking differently about providing services. And it starts with realizing that once you have the basic infrastructure in place, or at least you know how you're going to deliver your services, you need to turn from designing services and rolling them out to discovering your customers and really learning about your customers' needs. You need to have a narrative, a storytelling approach to what is it that really would make a difference in the lives of my customers. And instead of seeing all your customers as a single mass of people that all need the same thing, you need to diversify. That's one of the challenges. But I would say it starts one step earlier, and that is you need to develop inspiration. You need to develop the drive to become a different force in the world.
So Kevin, what's your take on this, given your encounter and engagement with these large telco firms all around the world, not only in this region?
Yeah, it is interesting that, telcos for many years, traditionally were kind of the center of their own universe to a certain extent, and they were able to do a lot. And with the digital, this fourth digital revolution and the challenges that go with that, there's also real opportunities for the service providers. And I think one of the major assets that a service provider has is trust, actually. And I think they're typically a very highly trusted brand within a region. And that's something that as a major advantage that they've got over smaller startups or OTT type players or everything else like that. So I think that's something that you can't buy. You can't, that's something that you earn. And I think the service providers have done that and have that trust. I think I agree with Bard in the sense that there is a mind shift in that. I remember when we started working with the TM Forum back in back in 2010, 2011, I was still working in Southern Africa at that stage, and we were looking at how service providers are to transform, how they're to change, and with at that time we were referring to things as the digital revolution, which is now the digital transformation. But the concept there is the fact that you don't start with the how, you need to start with the why, the who, and what you want to achieve. And almost you have to adopt the mindset of more of a startup and thinking about why you want to do it, what's the value proposition, who's your customer. So typically, my experience is doing large enterprise software projects for years, and some of them went on for years and years. And they were horrible things, right? Most of them weren't very successful because a lot of the time they never really listened to the business. Now it's a complete shift in that you start from the outside and you work in. So the huge advantages that the telcos have is they've got trust. They should understand their customers well. They have great information, great data on things. And I think it's actually the paradigm shift that'll tell the difference between those organizations that will succeed. It's like Ford. Ford now label themselves as a mobility company. They don't talk about being a car manufacturer. They're a mobility company, right? Which and telcos, I believe, have to have that kind of a mindset.
If I can say one thing about this, Kevin, I just remember that I worked with Telstra in Australia for a while, and what I found shocking really was that their design of their products was all about what can we deliver, what are we capable of, and that's the wrong question, right?
Absolutely, you don't start with the how; it's the last thing.
So it's what is needed. What do our customers need? What makes a difference in their lives? Yeah, and that question was really hard to get into the minds of people. But once they got it, yeah, then you go to that startup mentality of, so if that's what they need, then let us try to get there.
And going back to what we talked about earlier, is you look at it from an MVP, start iterating through it. Look at other opportunities within an ecosystem, existing ecosystems. Luckman and I do a lot of work with the TM Forum, and one of their key themes at the moment is what they call beyond connectivity. So it's not just about the connectivity. It's not about the pipe. It's what's the additional value you can add. That's really important.
Yeah. So it's an interesting case. So we have the trust, which is a very big asset. Actually, it's even bigger than the network infrastructure, the data that telcos already have. People already trusted them with their data, providing the service. So the transition is easy. Looking at this pandemic, it has accelerated the hopes, reaching to the reality of the hopes of these big firms to really achieve that virtual teams, remote work thing. For them, we see many of them still locked into the co-location mentality. So they just put 10% of their active working force at their company locations and putting the other workers aside, where many feel marginalized, and other companies, so they are not making use of them remotely. They only see use of them at the office. And if they cannot be at the office because of the pandemics, the lockdown, and the regulation, then that's it. So that's it. We can do nothing. And other companies are doing this new model, which is remote work, which is totally centered around WhatsApp. So it's like the only channel of communication. So is this okay? Does it work in both cases? So let's start by the first case, which is the inclusion of the 10% working at office. So what is your feedback on this point of shifting the culture towards virtual team and remote work?
Kevin, you can start.
Yeah, let me start.
It's an easy question.
Look, I think it can differ quite significantly per country, per region. The reality is the world is never going to be quite the same as it was 18 months ago. That's a fact, right? The way we work is not going to be the same as the way it was. People are going to do things differently. you know, the concept of digital transformation has accelerated by about 3 years. Stuff that's happening now, people weren't expecting to happen way ahead. We're doing work with companies that are literally what we call bricks and mortar companies, like that are looking to transform. And I don't mean just getting a website. They're looking at, you know, renting construction equipment as a service. You know, how do you get a dump truck as a service, and putting IoT and all of these things where you've got people who are you know, forced to do things because they have to change. Now, the way we work as well is different, and organizations, you know, there are going to be restrictions in terms of space, in terms of ability to connect at home and that. But I also think that in many cases, you know, organizations are going to run into a hybrid situation, and there are going to be situations where there will be people working from not in the office, but in a decentralized area. And that's going to be a fact of life. But I also see, and we'll probably touch on this in a minute, but I also see it as an advantage, the fact that the remoteness is there, because it can, you know, the smart organizations can look at it and potentially use it to their advantage as well.
Yeah. But from a cultural perspective, and I've been observing this because it seems an acceleration of a trend that was sort of waiting in the wings. Everybody was expecting it to happen and it didn't happen, and there was resistance to going remote. And then all of a sudden we were forced to. One of the reasons this is going all remote is not a complete solution is that work, and this is a cultural thing, work is not just something you do for money. Work is also a social activity, right? It's something we do together. It gives meaning to our lives. And I think what companies struggle with is when people are not together in the same space, how do you provide the social cohesion that you automatically get when you can put people in a single office? And so companies are slowly learning that it's okay to keep people remote, but you need to include them into the cultural story. They still need to feel part of the organization. That requires extra care. Now, it's possible. There's organizations that have done it for their entire existence. I worked for Gartner. I didn't even meet my team members until I'd worked there for 3 years or so. And yet we felt like a team because there was extra attention to the social cohesion. So that's one side. So you need to become more sensitive to the mechanisms you have to include people, which means more opportunities for them to just be together, have social online meetings as well as work meetings, to give people opportunities to develop little initiatives on their own that they can take ownership of, that are not centrally controlled, but feel something that they are actually owners of. But most importantly, keep reminding people of the why they are actually doing this, right? It's going back to that inspiration. People that know what their contribution is to the organization and feel valued can spend long hours working on their own. If they feel that they are forgotten and left out of the main narrative, they will drift off and they disappear.
So
that is crucial.
Yeah, so that leads us to the importance of having a communication architecture within the company. So between asynchronous and synchronous communication. So Kevin, what is your input here? What are properly, you know, so when I want to have immediate meeting, is WhatsApp the only tool, or we have others? So, and when I want to have asynchronous communication, typing messages, what are the channels out there that can be used?
Yeah, like to me, like within our organization, we use WhatsApp, we use Slack, you use email, we use Zoom, we use Teams, you know, there's a range of different things that are there. But to me, they're the medium, right? That's the way of communication is through those items. But what's more important is that there's some key kind of communication principles, and there's expectations there. And to me, you know, just putting something into a WhatsApp message or into a Slack message, and you know, isn't the answer. Isn't, you know, it's the same thing that it would have been, you know, 20 years ago when people would be writing memos, or when they would have been sending faxes or leaving voicemails. So to me, it's less about the tool that people use. It's more about the method and the way that you manage your team. The most important resource in any organization is the people, right? You can talk digital this and digital that, but guess what? Nothing happens without people. So the team is the most fundamental element within that. And having that team efficient and happy, successful.
Yep.
So the focus then should not be on the technology itself. So there should be some rituals for the team to achieve this inclusion.
Correct.
Yeah, some companies, including us, we have a daily pulse meeting for 15 minutes every day to hear from everyone in the team. When we have projects, we create team charters. We have our communication architecture where we specify which channels, which tools for which thing. So collaboration cannot happen over Zoom. So if we want to collaborate, there are tools for that. People know probably very few of them, but if we speak about telecommunication, probably CurateFX is one of the best tools to achieve that. Can you give us a brief about it, Kevin?
Yeah, thanks. So one of the things we've worked with the TM Forum over the last few years is providing the membership with a platform that will enable them to collaborate on creation and ideation associated with digital services. So the important thing, again, when you're looking at a digital service is, as we've talked about, is you've got to look at it from the outside, but you've also got to look at it from different perspectives. It can be from the business, from the IT perspective, from marketing, from a whole range of different things. So to be able to have a platform that enables people to have structured collaboration. There are really good collaboration and brainstorming tools out there like Miro and Mural have gained a huge amount of success over the last while. And they're really good from a brainstorming point of view and up front. But they're unstructured in the sense, and that's part of their advantage, is they're digital whiteboards that you can put the yellow stickies and you can brainstorm and throw everything in. But when you want to then go and say, well, okay, now we need to start associating ownership with them. We want to understand who the stakeholders are. We want to do stakeholder mapping. We need to understand the ecosystem modeling. And by the way, we want to leverage anything that's available from TM Forum and other best practices and standards. It could be from things such as the business architecture group. It could be business modeling. So that's where we've kind of helped in the telco space, is providing that structured collaboration platform that's used both in this region and throughout the world.
The best thing I have heard about this is that such tools like CurateFX and the others help templatize the thought process. So people, instead of going and downloading documents here and there and studying them and trying to extract the knowledge, so this workflow puts you in the right step. So you don't ask what's next, and automate many of the parts of the process, such as mapping with ETOM and frameworks of TM Forum, the Open API, etc. This leads me to a question for Bart. Bart, many people, especially in countries where there is no regulation, unregulated countries in the region, countries where there is no low level of governance and maturity, enterprise maturity, many companies do not even have an enterprise architecture function within the company, and they will tell you many startups have launched successful digital services. Why do we need to create a business plan for the digital service? Why do we need to plan for it in the first place? We just go and buy the technology and hire some programmers and just go about it and succeed. So is that true? What's the importance of business planning? What's the importance of enterprise architecture? I would like to hear from both of you. So I'll start with Bart.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question, because there have been many successes that went relatively unplanned, but that only lasts for a short period of time, right? The startups that do not plan their business architecture invariably run into a scaling problem. So when the success hits them, then they have to scramble to meet the expectations of a fast-growing customer base. That's one way they go wrong. The other one that enterprise architecture, for instance, is to make choices about the future directions you want to be prepared for. You cannot be prepared for all the outcomes because most of it is unpredictable. As a startup, you cannot actually be sure about which of your initiatives are going to take off. And if you haven't worked out the scenarios, then you'll be completely taken by surprise. The worst thing that can happen without, let me take one step back. Enterprise architecture doesn't mean huge libraries of diagrams where you document every bit of technology you have in your organization and complicated process schemas. For me, enterprise architecture is asking the basic question of, if this is what we are trying to achieve, what are the options that we have to consider? What are the choices we need to make? And what is the best way of bringing all these options together in a single integrated business, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some people can do it on the back of a napkin.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
don't need big architecture, but you need to make this consideration of your business 2 steps before it happens to you.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you'll invariably end up being too late. That's what kills a lot of startups. They're not able to get over that threshold of success.
Mm-hmm.
The next problem you get is if you manage to negotiate that successfully and you really become big, your business fragments.
So it's a scalability problem.
It is always a scalability problem.
You may manage to build a small room without a diagram or a map. However, I will not believe that you will build a city or a country.
Try building a skyscraper with the same tools that you use to build the room with the same amount of planning. You will find that after stacking up a few floors, things will start crumbling. Exactly. It's maybe the best. And city planning is the next level, right? If everybody would just build a house wherever they like, it will not become a functional city. Because roads will be missing, water and electricity will not be in the right place or not have the capacity. I give you one example, the city that I lived in for a long time, Brisbane in Australia, they forgot to plan for a ring road around the city. So for many years, all traffic had to go right through the center of the city. If they had only thought of it in the 70s when there was still space, they could have built it cheaply. Now they had to destroy whole city blocks just to make space for the road that they should have planned for.
So this is important. So Kevin, is planning important? Are there any statistics about how can planning contribute to the success of launching digital services from the first day?
Yeah, well, yeah, pretty obviously the answer is going to be yes. The interesting thing on this is the fact that you need to plan, and you need to kind of future-proof, thinking about, as Bart was saying, thinking about 2 steps ahead. When you're talking about digital services, more than likely, and when people talk about digital transformation, the other word that goes hand in hand with that is ecosystems. And by ecosystem, you're talking about multiple people being involved. So service providers, and I've worked for service providers 20 years ago, and the partners didn't care. They did everything. It was central. Now, if you're looking at 5G services, if you're looking at other digital services, you've got to look at how you're going to do that as part of an ecosystem. But a couple of interesting things is that McKinsey reckon, based on the survey that they've done, that digital transformation projects have a 70% chance of failing, right? So, and then you look at, okay, well, why do most of them fail? And if you start digging into a little bit more in terms of business ecosystems, and Boston Consulting Group have done a lot of work in this area on this as well. And of the business ecosystems that fail, 85% fail because of poor design. Right? Not because of poor execution, not because they didn't have a good idea, but because they weren't designed. And of those, over 50% of those that do fail are due to poor governance. Now, governance isn't somebody, looking over them and managing it. It's things with have you got consistency with data? How are you onboarding a partner? How do you onboard a product or service within that ecosystem? So this actually talks to your original question around business architecture an enterprise architecture, you need to look at, have a standard way of engaging. And if you don't have that, you won't scale and it won't succeed. So, you know, the effort and we're seeing more and more people spending, you know, focusing on that early stage of a project in terms of ideation and doing it in an agile way, and leveraging what people have done, whether it's the TM Forum, whether it's business architecture guilds, whether it's TOGAF, ITIL, whole range of elements that are out there for people to use, and methodologies like, you know, PMBOK and BizBOK. All of those things can really help, but you have to have that strategy, and that work has to be done, and you can't do it, I believe, in, you know, some of it in PowerPoint, a bit in Word, and some stuff stuck over in Excel. You've got to have a single view to be able to look at that and manage it effectively.
You got to bring it together, and
absolutely.
And there's one thing that I think needs to be added to enterprise architecture or business architecture and governance, and that is, as people experiment their way towards the service they're going to deliver, they leave a lot of debris behind. There's all sorts of half products in between stages that don't get cleaned up. Different ways of working that worked for a while but need to be adjusted, but remain somehow in the genetic material of the organization. So one of the things that I found is missing in a lot of organizations is a function that just looks back and says, what do we no longer need? What can we now get rid of? Because it's becoming an obstacle. It's becoming, you know, it's a burden to carry it forward. That cleaning function alone makes enterprise architecture worthwhile.
The other one I know from, you know, we work through as well as a conscious focus is on what we call technical debt, right? So as you're iterating and as you're going through MVPs, you know, 90% of MVPs aren't minimum viable products. They end up being production, right? They end up going live. And, you know, because you've gone through that iterative process, you may have taken some shortcuts, but that's not the problem. The problem is ignoring it, because
not cleaning it up.
And kick you in the butt later down the road, right? So to understand how you pay back that debt, and also looking and saying, well, you know, how do we ensure, what's our best practices in terms of keeping our libraries updated? What's our best practice in terms of data security, right? What, you know, looking at all of these things, you can't, it's not just what you see on the outside. You've got to also work from, you know, look at it from the inside as well.
So we have a question from Hatem. Hatem, his question is saying that, what are the major challenges on the public sector? Let me take it, let me elaborate. So I working on Africa and Middle East, I see many customers, you know, seeing a divide between where they are right now in terms of organizational maturity and their needs, and where the top-notch advanced telco firms are at, like Vodafone and the others. And when they hear people speaking about digital ecosystems and services, and they hear 5G and they hear about the different methodologies and stuff, etc., they say there is a gap. How can we bridge this divide? And this is a big challenge, not only in developing countries. Public sector is usually one step behind in terms of bureaucracy, in terms of motivation, than even in the US. So the main challenge is attracting the right talent. So, you know, in the region, there were many civil unrest and wars here and there between countries. I was in Angola for 2 years, and I've seen the 30 years war, what it has done. Some recruiting managers were trying to bring talent from abroad to the country. The system does not compensate well, the governmental system. So probably you can bring people from abroad to private companies, international firms. And I've seen other firms trying to bring international expertise as shadow management to create the internal talents. And other firms where we're trying to have a hybrid model. Others in the Gulf were trying to start greenfield. So a totally new unit, hire the board from Silicon Valley, hire the CEO from Harvard. And however, this is so which approach? Is it the greenfield? Is it bringing diaspora from abroad? Is it bringing shadow management to upskill the local team? Which approach is the right one?
The answer is yes. It's all of them, right? There's not a single approach here, Lakman. I wanted to say one thing, and then I'll hand it back to Kevin. There is a universal problem with public sector organizations that I think you see everywhere in the world. And that is, public sector organizations should not be expected to function like businesses. It undermines the very reason for their existence, right? They are not competitive organizations. Their function, because they are public sector, is to provide service for everyone. They cannot be exclusive because their customers are citizens and their customers cannot choose. And so I have always found that the public sector looking at the commercial sector for ideas on how to run a business are doing the wrong thing. That's one of the issues that we need to resolve. Public sector needs a different mindset, which is a service mindset to the entire population. But there's another thing, and that is public sector needs a different approach to safety and risk. To get good people to stay in the public sector, to get them to come is okay, because you can appeal to their idealism, to the sense of I'm serving my own people, I'm serving society. You'll very often find enough people wanting to do that. But when you get them inside and then they find that every step you do, you're bogged down by bureaucracy, all the management behaviors are risk averse, and you don't dare to make even a single mistake, because when it hits, in public sector, when you make a mistake, it's the end of your career, things like that. Risk taking, I see as one of the biggest issues in public sector, is they have no appetite for risk, and we need to somehow change that. Is that so? On the one hand, you have the idea of serving everybody means that you cannot commercially compete. Mm-hmm. We need to get that straight. The other thing is we need to create safety and inspiration for public sector workers. That is really hard to do in the current climate. In developing countries or in stable countries, in unstable countries, it's even worse, right? So you start with safety. You need to provide a level of safety, both physical and psychological. That is underestimated. I think people need that sort of level of psychological safety to just, to feel safe to bring their best to the table. Mm-hmm. Kevin, what do you think?
No, I agree. We do a lot of work in the government and, the public sector, specifically a lot of work in with smart cities and that, and our cities and municipalities. And, to me, often what comes down to what works and what doesn't work is actually down to leadership. I think with leadership and the right motivation, it can do a lot. You can do a lot with little, to be honest with you. I do agree that you can't look at the public sector in the same way as you look at the private sector. The motivation is completely different. You've got the whole political, elephant in the room that is always there, regardless of where you are in the world, and the fact that depending on where you are in an election cycle will determine a lot of what's going to happen or what won't happen. But I do think, it was interesting last week. I had a call with Gardner, and Gardner believed that the number one sector for focusing in terms of digital transformation, and the area that they see the greatest level of growth, is in the government side of things. It's ahead of financial services, way ahead of telecom. That is the area that is going to be seeing a massive level of attention. Now, the other thing is that, the government can, you can leverage what was done in the private sector and pull that in and use that. But you also still, it comes back to the people that are working there. And you do have situations in government groups and government departments and municipalities where you may have somebody who's been there for 30 years. And, it comes to the culture and how you can get those people to help. And going back to one of the things that Lakman mentioned earlier was about, the different methods of approaching your remote, your whatever else. In many countries, including my country, I'm living here in Ireland, a large number of our population had to emigrate, had to leave because there was no work here. Now the government is actually had been actively trying to get them all to come home. But now it's kind of saying, well, we actually have a bit of a housing crisis. We don't actually want them all to come home. What we would like them to do is work remotely, right, for the companies here or for the government. And I think that is something that can be, certainly something that any country in the world should look at, because you're gaining the benefits of the experience that your nationals had overseas, and being able to leverage that and bring that experience home. And
Believe it or not, I even see that.
That'll help also bring the people in country up to speed as well.
Now, I was going to say, I even see that in the Netherlands. I never expected that to see that here. I migrated to Australia more than 20 years ago. The Netherlands have a shortage of IT knowledge inside public sector organizations. Why? Because the smart people in public sector moved abroad, and then the Dutch government forgot about the expatriates. There was no attempt to keep them connected to their home country. You just didn't exist. And when you compare that, for instance, to neighboring countries like Ireland, like the Brits, where even when they're abroad, they have strong connections to their home country, it's much easier to pull these people back into contributing to their home country. So one of the things I would say to any country that is looking for talent is your expatriates have learned a lot by moving away. Make them feel at home again with their own country. They don't necessarily have to move back, but include them again into the culture, into the social fabric, and they're much more inclined to help you. Mm-hmm. The Dutch made this terrible mistake to ignore their expatriates. I think it's costing them dearly now.
So that, the culture thing leads us to the culture thing. We still have 10 minutes. So I will give some perspective from my part of the world on how we manage this culture thing for digital services in less than 3 minutes. And I would like to hear your feedback before we take some questions and close this webinar. So I have seen on and on many companies, not only in the public sector, but also in the private sector, tackling the launch of digital services or any other program or project or digital transformation by just creating an RFP and creating a tender document. And that tender document will linger for 1 year probably, and it's asking for specifications. And assuming that the people on the buyer side know the deliverables, and you run out with these initiatives and in analysis paralysis, they will just stay forever and doing nothing. And even the ones that have materialized, it's only focused on technology. So I see Bassem from the audience speaking about the as-is processes and starting from the baseline and from the current level of maturity. If we take it one step further, it's a 3-step approach we have adopted as a method in the region, in our project in the region. The first step is inspire. So it's focusing on getting the buy-in of people and getting them motivated. We use an instrument for that called the GC index. It's the energies and impact that people can bring to the business, and assembling the right team with its charter, with its upskilling, which is the next step. Give them the knowledge, because knowledge is the next logical step in change management. So upskilling in terms of training, not only the technical one, even the attitude, the soft skills training, how they can work remotely, and they have the right habits for that. And after you give them the 2 parts, the hard and soft skills training, we get them into the skill part. Instead of jumping without warming up into the exercise, into the real project, we need to work on readiness. And this is what we call readiness. We inspire people, we upskill people, and then we go into giving them a proof of concept, smaller process or project. We call some of them the process clinics, to get to practice, and then the aha moment will come, because 10% comes from the formal, 20% from the coaching, and then the real experience, the real project. Once you've warmed up, you will face less issues. So what's your take on this approach, Kevin and Bart?
No, I like it. I think it makes a lot of sense. Some of the feedback we get from teams who are working in a collaboration, and I think, the idea of getting the different kind of key people from different groups working together is really important. you know, one of the things you want to do is when you refer to it, I think, as the aha moment. I think sometimes that aha moment is actually a question. To me, the most important thing is part of the early phase of a project and getting people together is ensuring that there's the openness and there's the ability for people to raise questions. Because to me, the questions are the most important thing, not the answers. The answers you can get if you have the question. But the best thing is when you're in those stages and somebody says, geez, I hadn't thought of that. Or here's something that, oh yeah, and one thing leads to another. That's gold dust, right? What you're doing there, in my mind, is you're creating knowledge. So it's about knowledge creation, right? And it's the knowledge creation across the group, right? It's the collective, right? To do that in isolation, where the three of us here were to have these conversations with ourselves and write them on a bit of paper, it would be far less effective because, you know, Bard's going to feed off something I've said and you as well. That's what it's about. And that's what makes things work in terms of from a culture and an ideation perspective.
And if I can add one thing, because I don't want to take up too much time, but the key word here, and Kevin already identified it, it's not just that you create knowledge by letting people explore, they own that knowledge because they stumbled across it themselves. Yes. I can give you a book, I can explain the book to you, but until you've experienced it yourself, you don't yet own that knowledge. Now, it's the same with change. Change that is dictated from above is not owned by the people in the organization. They may do it, but it's not theirs. Change that they discover themselves as you, as Makman says, as you inspire them, as you educate them, and then put them to work on making it happen, becomes their change. They have a sense of ownership of it, and that is irreplaceable. You cannot match anything else with that.
And also, you're getting this implicit buy-in.
Yeah, exactly.
You're not writing an RF, you're not writing the document that I'm going to send to Bard and say, Bard, I want you to review this and I need you to sign it at the bottom in order to buy into it. No, you're creating this together, and that implicit buy-in is invaluable.
So that's the co-creation, the co-ownership.
Absolutely.
That's the goal you're after.
And you know,
okay, I think Lakman wants to start.
Sorry, Lakman, go ahead.
You may have your word, Kevin. It's just no problem.
No. I can just keep talking for another hour, so I'm going to be quiet.
Yeah, no problem. So now we've covered almost all of the elements: the people element, the process element, the local case study that worked. For the case study, it's available at Team Forum. Probably Ahmed or Hakim can send the link to the panelists. It's available on our social media pages as well. And for the method behind Curate Effects is to define, design, scope, and collaborate. So this is another method on how to launch successful digital services. There are trainings from Team Forum about this, the foundation digital ecosystems training and the practitioner training, which I've collaborated with Kevin recently to have it part of the change management effort in one of the initiatives. And also the part of the software itself, the part of change management. It's not only the GC index, so it's executive coaching for the leaders as well in the organization. Emotional intelligence. It's where Bard is actively working on and tackling, even when he speaks about the technical side of things. So if you want more information, teamforum.org is the international organization. Makman.co. We have also more specific things to the region. Transgrowth on the business coaching, on the change management enterprise architecture, and Trident. It's not only for telco. Their digital transformation accelerator program it goes beyond telco to other sectors to enable them accelerate the transformation. So you have the people side, the process side, and the technology side, the leadership side, the culture system side that you need to tackle for success. So I see some comments all boiling down. Ihab is mentioning that it's when the gain outweighs the pain. It's where you need to invest more, and it's true. And Bassem about the as-is documentation. So do we have any questions from the audience? Any other questions? Yeah. So So then, if we don't have any, Ahmed, do you have questions from Facebook or from the other social media pages?
No, no, not until now. No.
So we will have other webinars in this regard, discussions, and we thank you for showing up and your attendance. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Bard, and I look forward to having other sessions with you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.